I was taking the usual ride home, and as I was staring at the repeated patterns of cars in front of me, my mind started to wander. This scene of monotonous echoes of metal reminded me of a segment in the 2005 PS2 game called Path of Neo. In that game, our protagonist finds himself stuck in a train sequence that keeps on looping. This got me wondering about how this segment came to be. We all found ourselves at some point feeling like we're stuck on a never-ending train ride, with time, although relentlessly moving forward, still feeling stagnant. A repeated pattern of pause, begin and pause again, inevitably feeling like a time loop, and we all wished there was a way out of that civil purgatory. Neo solved the loop and escaped the train, but I didn't escape mine, because I started wondering why time loops are so fascinating to the human mind, why sometimes they embody suffering, and why sometimes they feel cathartic. Did you ever wish you could turn back time and change the way you acted? Can you think of a scenario that reliving it multiple times would be hell for you? Well, come with me as I break down why we are so fascinated with time loops. What are some great ways that this concept has been used in games, books, and movies? And finally, I will tell you about the time loop story that inspired me to create this channel and my logo. Let's get started. Part 1. The Chase of the Perfect Run. It is ingrained in the language of video games that a fail state is not really a fail state if it's not in a cutscene. In any scenario where our character dies, we're supposed to accept that we're peeking at a possible reality, but in the game's plot, the character didn't die here. Although many games such as Dark Souls, Hades, and Death Stranding try to explain away our deaths with a story element, for most games it is an unquestionable fact that even though you failed, you will soon after turn back time and try again. This is in essence a time loop that goes unnoticed. In fact, if the game were to simply end, as it would make perfect sense, it would seem more absurd to us than magically teleporting 5 minutes in the past like nothing ever happened. And the main reason we accept this part is that games are created to be challenging, and by trying and failing we get to learn patterns, become efficient, and craft the stories that we want to tell. A story in which our character breezes through the sequence as he was always meant to do. This idea of a perfect run is so appealing that it has become a phenomenon. It's the reason we love a zero death run or a good speed run. What if someone can blast through something in a matter of minutes when it would take hours normally, using sheer skill and scenario awareness? Everybody waited eagerly for that scene where Bill Murray would have the perfect day in Groundhog Day. As soon as this idea of a possible trial and error is introduced, our brains are already fantasizing the character putting all the pieces together and acing the run. So one key component to have a compelling time loop story depends on the parameters of the loop. In Groundhog Day, the events loop every 24 hours. Or if any unexpected circumstances occur. This gives the character time to perfect the run and develop in the process. Here's a question. How would it affect the narrative if the time frame of each loop was much shorter? In 12 minutes, the player is stuck in a time loop in which he has to use every death or every instance of running out of time to slowly add the pieces of the story. At a specific point during the loop, a man will come to his house and kill him and his wife for an inexplicable reason. The player must find a way to stop this, figure out the intentions of the killer, and why he is stuck in this predicament. If you are like most people, this premise alone got you curious, and let's be honest, who doesn't like a good mystery wrapped in time loop encoding? An interesting premise is most of what 12 minutes has to offer. That doesn't say much because an interesting premise is almost guaranteed when we're talking about a time loop plot. A predictable reset of a time loop can be a very powerful tool because it makes communication with the player or audience clear. In the German movie Run Lola Run, time passing is at the center of each loop. We know that our eccentric protagonist has 20 minutes to reach her destination. Given that fact, the movie utilizes many shots to indicate the passage of time, while also establishing waypoints to the journey, with small encounters and landmarks. To maximize the use of these encounters, each small change in the loop
produces a small butterfly effect to these people's lives, showing us how a small difference of how things can play out can have drastic changes in the course of someone's life. In this movie, Lola needs to find 1,100 marks in the span of 20 minutes, but also running to get to her boyfriend, who will soon die if he cannot deliver the money. Run Lola Run uses this urgency to create stakes with its story. The movie feels short because it never stopped running. Hence, the tight borders of the time loop work together with all these elements to create a thrilling runtime. The energetic 2000s music makes the movie oddly nostalgic, while the structure of the story, style of editing, and the protagonist's appearance strangely remind me of the game Fury. So a longer time frame gives breathing space for character development and world building, while a shorter time frame creates tension. Is it possible to have a balance of both? Welcome to the Forgotten City. In this game, the main character is stuck in a time loop in this small Roman village that operates by some twisted rules. In this community, if someone commits a sin, so if they kill, steal, or attack another person, they will have violated the golden rule. Violating the golden rule means everyone dies. So if one person ever makes a mistake, it will be everyone's mistake. What makes the situation even worse is that the people of the village have grown incredulous to this and will soon vote out the current leader, Cynthius, for another more radical candidate which is ready to challenge the golden rule. When that first happened, Cynthius elected to sacrifice himself in this altar, which is the reason you were brought there and can as such create a loop to the first moment you arrive. So here's the goal. Find out how to stop everyone from breaking the golden rule and figure out a way out of there. That is the simple premise, but in reality there's much more that can be discovered. Of course, you yourself can break the golden rule, and sometimes that is the best way forward. Since that way, for example, you can steal medicine that this merchant is trying to sell to you at a crazy high price and keep that medicine from when the game loops back. Using that medicine can make the patients at Apollo Temple speak, so in turn they can answer your questions, which will consequently give you the info you need to convince this character to not jump from the cliff. And since he's now alive, you can chat with him and he'll give you more pieces of the puzzle. Using each run's knowledge and building on top of it is a beautiful way to uncover the story. Not having time loop as a mechanic would make the narrative less compelling. Although the Forgotten City provides something unique with its time loop mechanics, it is still missing something. I want you to think a little bit bigger now. What if the mysteries were not grounded in a small village of deceptive characters, but were instead placed on different planets with rules and behaviors that are completely mysterious to the player? Experimentation would be the only way to find answers. Each area you discover would make you feel like an animal trying to survive in an environment full of predators and hazards. And if you fail to find answers in time, everybody dies in a supernova explosion. Well, if that sounds fun to you, let me talk to you about the magical experience of playing Outer Wilds. A common phrase in academia is that your work stands on the shoulders of giants. I always loved that way of looking at our collective efforts towards knowledge. Everybody works together independent of time and space to lead humanity to a desired outcome. What's more poetic? Outer Wilds takes this concept of standing on previously established work, but here it is not other people that you stand on, but instead is your past failures and death that provides all the knowledge. The game starts with a launching day. Today is the day you're going to space. Like others before you, this is your turn to explore the galaxy and figure out the wonders that the world holds, but not before you get the launch codes. Getting the launch codes is of course a carefully constructed ploy to get you to wander around, learn about your species, learn about the rules of the game and tools at your disposal. Here people are friendly and you have nothing to worry about, because when you get into space, your only friend is the sounds you can catch from other travelers. Outer Wilds is at its heart a game about space exploration. You stand on the shoulders of the previous explorers to educate yourself on the dangers of space But the twist is that now you can stand on your own shoulders because each time you die, you look back to the time that you have to launch again. It's a mechanic that is necessary to keep continuity and to play the balancing force for you not knowing what dangers lie ahead, while also preserving the game's mystery. The game world doesn't telegraph anything to you, so you're left isolated in trying to understand the rules of engagement as a wild animal would interacting with its surroundings. To keep players from being too cautious in the face of adversity, the game utilizes a similar time limit like Forgotten City. Just here, everybody will die because of a supernova. You need to figure out how to stop this from occurring. Another reason why the time loop as a mechanic works is that if the player would respawn 3 seconds after a fail state, the game would lose all tension and would give wrong reinforcement to the user, making him more careless. Now that the game loops, the player uses that information for his next run and understands the game's language and how the game is intended to be played. If a supernova would not happen, the player might be willing to spend an exhausting amount of time cautiously approaching anything and basically slowing the game to a crawl. Both components are necessary to create a good balance of gameplay and guide the player to a perfect run. So in short, we love this idea of a perfect run because we love seeing a scenario that is messy and difficult evolve to being a perfect dance between the character and his environment. The time frame borders of each loop need to be such that the narrative has a way to make the player curious as well as making them hurry. Clear waypoints need to be established to sell the feeling that you are in a time loop where certain events will occur in specific times. If all of these components are present, the player can enjoy a time loop story that is blood-pumping, engaging, as well as mysterious and fulfills the fantasy of the perfect run. But what if the time loop structure is not about a calculated, flawless run, but instead aims to create dread and misery and some introspection? Part 2. Punishment. The myth of Sisyphus is a short story about a man tasked by the gods to push a rock up the mountain to only have to do it all over again after the rock falls down. Sisyphus is stuck in a time loop, with no escape and with the task at hand being extremely unrewarding to say the least. Many would say that this time loop is the utmost form of punishment, even though Albert Camus might argue otherwise. And although people love to complain that our lives today feel similar to that of Sisyphus, with repetitive jobs and days feeling eerily similar to one another, it is hard to argue that most of us don't have a say in that, but our poor hero Sisyphus does not. A typical Souls-like session might be the most poetic version of a time loop suffering story. The player fights and dies many times and has his hopes taken away from him, with a carrot stick being conquering the boss. During that process, he cannot stop himself from trying again and again. He is free to escape the circle of despair and anger, but he's mentally chained and condemned to this fate as if he's Sisyphus at this moment in time, and this is his punishment from the gods. The player never stops to ask himself, how does my character feel being subjugated to this fate by me? All these brutal ways to die must leave a mark, right? If one dares to ask such questions, he will soon realize the only Sisyphus here is the game's character. Restart from Zero is a time loop story that makes you really notice how devastating it can be to look back after each death. Our character talks about how much pain he's enduring, and of course there's the mental suffering of knowing that in his world, he's very likely to experience it again, especially when he's surrounded by foes like this. Returnal is a third-person action game that tells the story of a stranded astronaut stuck in a time loop on this alien planet. Our protagonist must battle relentless hordes of enemies while unraveling fragments of a past she desperately wishes to forget. These buried memories, however, are forcefully brought into the surface, compelling her to confront them head-on. Each loop, even though circular in nature, still brings her closer to her dark and repressed memories. As more and more pieces of the puzzle start to fall down, the world, events, and enemies all start to look a bit familiar to her. Some might argue that we are seeing a form of purgatory. A time loop-based purgatory, in many ways, is in fact the worst form of suffering. In the sense that whatever you think is the worst form of punishment for someone, it surely stands to reason that having to do it all over again makes it worse than only have to go through it once. The optimistic in us wants us to believe that a character placed in purgatory is there to be cleansed of their sins, is there to figure out a way out and move on. But in these cases, the loop takes the form of a spiral. Each iteration driving our characters deeper and deeper, leaving the only escape from such fate to be insanity. Enduring such negative events while feeling trapped is undoubtedly undesirable. However, another form of suffering arises from the absence of memories and lived experiences, particularly when they are not perceived by others. When a character has to relive a scenario, his perception of time moves linearly. He keeps making new memories and experiences emotion. But whatever connections he makes with other people will be erased the moment the loop starts again. All the love that might develop, each small interaction, each smile, completely resetting to a phase of ignorance. People bond over shared experiences or shared history, but our character is denied such luxury. So suffering, as far as it can be expressed through a time loop narrative, can be more than just being stuck in the predicament itself. It can be about forcing to relive something the character wished to never experience again, or about forcing him to go through it while having no one that can follow, relate, or understand him. This time around, I don't have a game to prop up as the best example of representation for all these themes, because focusing on one of these aspects creates a better and more focused narrative. Trying to combine them all would be hell. So in conclusion, what is important here is, of course, the time frames, so how long the loop lasts. The second important thing are the landmarks, key points that we can reference where he is throughout the loop. On one side, each loop is gonna get the character closer to a perfect run, and on the other side, each run is gonna get him deeper into the abyss. On the perfect run side, we have each iteration having an improvement. In the end, we're gonna have a satisfying payoff, and of course, we should expect some character development in the process. On the punishment side, the focus is on the pain of death and having to come back. There's usually a component about facing the past and having to overcome some sins, and we see a lot of the theme of isolation. But before I go, I'm gonna tell you a few things about the name of this channel and how it came to be, because it's very closely related. So in Greek mythology, Laelabs was a hound, but not any ordinary hound. Laelabs had this gift of always being able to catch his prey. So he was tasked by the gods this time to capture a very unique prey, the Tamesian fox. But the tragic thing with the fox was that it had the power to always escape its predator. So both these animals together, the hound and the fox, create infinity, because none of those two conditions can be fulfilled. So given that knowledge in this world is vast and ever-growing, when I say Laelabs of knowledge, I mean that as much effort as we put into learning things, it's always going to be futile. And that's okay. We successfully learn a few things, but of course it's impossible to learn everything. I am doing my part in failing to capture all knowledge with each video that I make, and you can join me in that journey too. See you in the next one. Bye. That's the it.